So here's the deal. Recognizing what we have in common brings us together, right? Like forever, you guys are going to be linked as like that, and you guys are going to be linked in that too. So it's just strange. That happens across friendships. That happens across sports stadiums and other places that you find yourself in. Commonality brings unity, right? The things that you have in common can bring unity among different type of people. And so far in this series, we've talked about what it looks like that we are one body, like within the church, that we are one body in through all of us because of what Christ does for us. We're all united in that. We talked about how we're one church, that even though that we are here, that there are people across this world, across the globe, that are Christians that we need to be mindful of and praying for them, that we are more than just what we see here or what we gather on a weekend here in this place, but across the world there are people, and that we are one church. And tonight I want to talk to you about something else, another type of unity, something that unifies every single person in the world. But before we take a deep dive into that, I want to ask you a question. I really want you to think about this for a second. I want you to answer this question. What is the most important thing in your life? So pause, okay? Just think about this question just for a second. How would you answer that question? What is the most important thing in your life? And I'd be very interested to know, I'm not going to ask you in this moment, how you would answer that question, how you would answer, this is the most important thing in my life. And I imagine some of you, even in that small space right there, tried to quantify that. And like, Matt, what do you mean by that, right? What do you mean really? Like, you mean like stuff, like things, like my PS5 or an Xbox or jewelry or, whatever it is. So how do you mean by that? You mean like relationships? You mean, do people count? Can someone be the most important thing in my life? I imagine you probably are thinking of it in that terms, and that's okay. But regardless of how you qualify this or how you want to put the parameters around this, I think it'd be interesting to know how you would answer that question. But what if I told you that I think that I know the answer for every single one of you? I know what is the most important thing in your life. And I can tell you that right now. I know the answer to that question for you, even if you don't know or how to answer that for you in this moment. The most important thing in your life is your relationship with God. Whether you think that was true or not, how you answer that is important. There's nothing more important in this world than your relationship with God. Nothing. Nothing is more important than how you respond to God and how you respond to Jesus. And the reason that I ask you that question to start is because if this is true for you, it's actually also true for every single person in the world. Whether they're a Christian or not, the most important thing in their life is their relationship with God. And until we start seeing things in that light, then the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter, because whether someone finds themselves as a follower of Jesus or not, or they're just kind of like the halfway type follower, where it's like, yeah, I believe in God, but I don't really like live it out. The most important thing in their life is their relationship with God and how they respond to Jesus. And that's because we all have one destiny. All of us one day are going to be in the same moment and have the same type of judgment. So what I want to do to you tonight is read a text to you from Revelation chapter 20. And this is a text I used if you were in church a couple weeks ago. I used this message to talk about this reality, but this is a reality that, as we talk about one, that we will all one day be in the same place. We will all of us will one day have the same opportunity. Now, this text comes from Revelation chapter 20, and it's a vision, okay? It's a vision from the Apostle John. John was one of the closest people to Jesus, and when John was near the end of his life, he was kind of on this island by himself, and he was like away from everybody else, and God gave him this vision of the future. It's incredible. In fact, have you guys ever tried to read Revelation and you're just like, well, what do I do with this, right? Like, I don't understand anything about this, right? I always tell people if they're like, how do I understand this? I say, okay, think of it like this. If you were to give, we all know who Moses is, right? Moses lived thousands of years ago, ate manna in the desert, all that kind of stuff, right? If you were to give Moses an iPhone and say, hey, explain this to the Israelites, how do you think Moses would do that? Well, it's like a thing that you talk on? Right? And, like, what words would he use? I almost feel like this is what John has to do to us as he looks into the vision, looks into the future. He has a vision of the things that will come, the things that are out of this world, and he has to describe it in a way that is so different than the people, than us that have never seen something like that. And so he uses a lot of different things. He'll say, like, I saw something that was like a sea of glass. Well, was it, or is that the best way that you can describe it to us? But here's the thing. In this text, it's actually very, very clear what John saw. And he describes it very, very clearly what will happen. So follow along with me in Revelation chapter 20. It's on the screen, verses 11 through 15. He says this, "Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. And books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire." Now, maybe that's not the most important or like the most encouraging text that you could sit here and engage in here. But I want to end this series talking about this because I think it is so important. That passage is a sobering reality of what is ahead for each and every one of us. And we're going to break it down a little bit, but I want you just to understand two very important principles that should help us to live our life a little bit differently. And here's the first one. One day, everything will pass. If we look at the very first part of that in verse 11, he says this, "And I saw a great white throne and him who seated on it. The earth and the heavens fled from his presence, and there was no place for them." Everything in the world will one day pass away. Now, I don't know how you answered that question at the beginning. What is the most important thing to you? I don't know if you put something to it like an Xbox or a guitar or something that you own. But I have to wonder, the most important thing in your life, will it be there that day? One day, when the earth and everything cannot stand before the presence of Jesus. There was no place for it. It fled. One day, everything will be gone. The only thing that will be remaining is the throne that Jesus is on. And here's where I think we get stuck. I think sometimes we get caught up in the things of this world. And listen, I'm guilty of this too. We get caught up in so many different things. And I think it's especially difficult for some of you guys because you are in this age bracket that's kind of like from age 15 to age 22, that you're in this moment right now where you are learning the things that you really care about and the passions that you have, and those things are going to dictate the rest of your life. The things that you care about right now, whether it's for animals and pets, or whether it's for music or helping other people, like whatever you start to latch on right now, those are the things that are going to dictate the rest of your life. You're in those formative years, and we get stuck on things, sports or music or different types of things that we start to care about so much, and we lose sight of this reality that one day everything is going to be gone. The only thing that will be left is our souls and the throne and Christ and God. That's it. That's it. Everything else passes away. And we lose sight of this because we care about a lot of other things, don't we? We care about what people say. We care about the things that we wear. We care about all these things, and we lose sight of this reality. I'm not saying that you should just not care about anything and be like, man, dude, everything's going to be gone one day, whatever. But we have to remember that one day, everything will pass away. But more importantly than that, we have to remember this. One day, and we'll spend some time here, we will all meet Jesus. This is what it comes down to. No matter who you are, no matter what you believe, one day, every single one of us in this room and every single person that you know will meet Jesus. Look at verse 12, the beginning of verse 12 of what he says. "And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne." Great and small, every single person. No matter how important you are or not important, no matter how gifted you are or not gifted you are, every single person is coming for this moment. They were all standing before the throne. So sure, do what you need to do now. Care about the things that you care about now. Care about making the team and getting good grades and finding a good job and living a happy life. Care about all those things now, but one day they will all pass away and we will all be standing there before Jesus. We will all meet Jesus one day. This is so important for us to recognize this. We will all be there, and we lose sight of this. We lose sight that our parents, our friends, our cousins, our teammates, our classmates, our coworkers, everybody that you know will be in this moment before Jesus, standing before the throne one day. Now, for some of us, many of us, a lot of people, that's great news. We want to be before Jesus. Some people are really excited about meeting Jesus. But did you see what happened next? It says, books were opened and people were judged according to how they lived. And some were cast into a lake of fire for punishment, for anyone whose name was not written in the book of life. You see, everybody is going to be invited to this unity party. Everybody is going to be in this moment. But for some people, it's going to be really good. And for some, it's not going to be good. I remember when I was a kid, I lived with my grandparents for until I was about 10 years old. And my grandma, I don't know if many of you have things like this. My grandma had a golf cart, all right, which, when you're a kid and a middle schooler is like the greatest thing in the world, right? Because you get behind the wheel. I've got some kids in my neighborhood that have a golf cart and they just drive everywhere, right? And, when I was in middle school, having that golf cart was like the coolest thing ever, right? And so, but there was one day where I got behind that cart and I was driving around crazy like a little preteen would, right? And I was just doing a bunch of dumb stuff. And I crashed the golf cart into this lantern statue that my grandma had, right? It was like the thing that you drove up into her driveway, and it was like the statue of this little guy that held a lantern, so it was like a pretty cool thing. And I crashed into it, and I knocked it over, and its head fell off, all right? And I was mortified, right? Like my grandma was like a lot older than me, and my grandpa was the type of guy that would I don't know if you have grandparents that are like this. My grandpa would take his belt off, and he'd fold it in half and whoosh, whip it. It's like, yeah, you're like, you know what I'm talking about, right? It was like the sign, you do something wrong, you're getting the belt. Now, I never got the belt, okay? But it was like intimidation, right? And I was so terrified of what my grandma was going to do to me. I went and I hid in my room there, and I just hid in the closet. That was my genius plan. It was they'll never find me, right? I won't be caught. But I was so terrified of the punishment, of what was going to happen for what I had done, that I just didn't even know how to respond. I just went and I hid, and I hoped that it would all go away. And I have to wonder if some people feel this way when they think about meeting Jesus. Because of how I lived and the things that I've done, if that does happen, man, I don't even want to think about it. I don't even want to think about that one day, that one moment, because of how I lived, I'm just kind of scared. Maybe some people are excited. Maybe some people are terrified. And in fact, we know that there are some people who think that this day will never come. But the reality is, I want you to think about this. How often do you think about this? How often do you remind yourself that there is an eternity at stake in how we live this life and with our relationship with God? How often do you think about that? We get caught up in our life and in our day-to-day, but we have to remember that there's an eternity before us. In fact, if you've been a part of your small groups the last couple weeks on Wednesdays, if you go to those groups, you know all of our groups have been studying for the past 4 weeks how to share Jesus, right? How to share Jesus with other people. And I know that those have been good conversations and everything like that. But if you're going to be truly compelled to share your faith, you have to realize this reality. One day, we will all be judged according to how we have lived this life. In fact, Jesus himself said that one day when he returns, he's going to separate people like sheep and goats, some to his left and some to his right. There will be a judgment, and he will separate people, some for eternal life and some not. The end of this text, Revelation chapter 20, verse 12 says, "The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books." Every single person, the moment they die, has their fate permanently sealed. There's no more opportunities. There's no more opportunities after you die. How you live this life, how you respond to Jesus in this life, your relationship with God in this life determines where you spend the rest of your eternity. What's more important than that? Can you think of one thing that is more important than that, than your relationship with God, and even beyond that, other people's relationships with God? We know that we're coming for this moment. We know that there will be this. We don't think about it all the time. We don't remind ourselves all the time that one day there's going to be a judgment, we're all going to be separated, and some people will have eternal life and some people won't. That's not what we wake up to on our mirrors every day and see, but we know this is true. We know one day what's coming before us. It's so important what people do with Jesus, and it should help us live our lives a little bit differently to help people come to know Jesus. I can't stand to think. Sometimes this is what keeps me up at night. I can't stand to think that I would be coming for this moment and be in this moment, and I would see people who I know, who I interacted with, who I have been around, and I never shared the truth about the gospel, or I never shared my relationship with Jesus. Can you imagine what that would feel like? It has to drive us to have spiritual influence with people. It has to drive us to this truth, is that we should share our faith like it is the most important thing in our life. If your relationship with Jesus is the most important thing in your life, and you believe that one day we will all be before that moment, we will all be before the judgment seat of Christ, and we will be separated, if you believe that's going to happen like the Scriptures tells us, then we share our faith like it is the most important thing in our life. That's what I want us to see tonight. If we all did this, we begin to live in a way that looks a little bit more like Jesus. I mean, Jesus went around teaching and preaching about the good news because he knew what was ahead. He knew that people needed to know the truth about the gospel and what God would provide for them. It wasn't popular all the time. In fact, oftentimes he got drove out of places. His disciples did the same thing. Paul, I mean, you think of 11 of the 12 disciples, the followers of Jesus, they were killed, crucified, beaten, stoned for their faith and their belief in the resurrection of Jesus because it was the most important thing to them. This is what I want us to understand. When we do this, when this is true for us, we can change the world. And I truly believe that. I believe that you can change your schools. I believe that you can change your family. I believe that you can change your community, the people that you have influence on, if this was true for you, if you truly shared your faith like it was the most important thing in your life. The reality is that it already is. It's a matter of if we live that way or not. Until you believe, until you recognize the one day that we're all coming for, until that compels you, you won't live like it's the most important thing in your life. It's what I want to challenge you with today. We are one body, we are one church, and we have one destiny. And that should all change the way that we treat each other and how we live our life. What I'm asking you tonight is to remember that we're all united in this way, that all of us are heading for the same place, before the throne. And if you care about people in your life enough, then you should do something and say something to help lead them to a relationship with Jesus. Pray with me.